The other thing that the NYU Abu Dhabi Institute does, besides sponsor events like this, is sponsor major research projects. And there's research projects in environmental sciences, in Arab classics and literature. Global Ties for Children is one of the research centers of the Abu Dhabi Institute, NYU Abu Dhabi Institute, which enjoys support from the Institute. We're a year and 2 or 3 months old. We got started in November of 2014. And Global Ties for Children's mission is to improve the design and implementation and evaluation of programs and policies to promote kids' development, not just their academic development, but their social, emotional, physical development, their holistic development in low-income and conflict-affected countries. What better place in the world than the Emirates, which is, if you charted where the 80% of the poorest and most fragile nations are in the world, the Emirates is sitting just about right in the middle of them, and the Emirates is involved in many, many ways. We have 3 objectives. The first is to what we call generate actionable evidence. Actionable evidence is evidence of what works that you can actually use to improve, design, scale programs and policies for kids, education policies, health policies, social protection policies. And a range of strategies. We develop advanced research methods to do this work. We use field experiments, rigorous field experiments, like you would test other things scientifically, but they're in the field in a very embedded way. We engage in the design, implementation, evaluation, and continuous improvement of programs. And we synthesize evidence across many different studies. Without that research synthesis task, you can't inform policy. Policy isn't influenced one study at a time. It's influenced by the accumulation of evidence. The second objective is it's fine to collect all that information, but unless you communicate it, the actionable evidence to policymakers, program developers, philanthropists, and others, it isn't going to have the impact that scientific research in this area could have. So again, there's a number of specific strategies, but we create and disseminate overviews of rigorous research, ours and others, and we supplement that work with input to governments and other international decision-making organizations. The third objective is to build the organizational and institutional capacity for a global science of children's development. And that's one of the great shining stars that I believe NYU's Global Network University, with NYU Abu Dhabi right in the middle of it, can achieve. The strategies there include creating intellectual communities. We've created a lot already, and providing training and professional development activities. We do this. No university in the world can do this, even one is engaged and diverse and with wings and feet in so many places, without strategic partners. And so we have several types of strategic partners. Some, like the International Rescue Committee, actually implement programs that we evaluate. Some evaluation partners, both IRC and Innovations for Poverty Action, are in between 15 and 25 countries in the world, and they're there on an enduring basis, and they employ indigenous people in the countries we work in to do both the interventions and the work of doing research. Save the Children, which straddles between those two, and then major international organizations like the World Bank. The World Bank is a giant influence on international development, and we work with the Strategic Impact Evaluation Fund, kind of the brain of research, the brain center of research at the World Bank on those kinds of things. And increasingly, the UN Sustainable Development Network. Many of you know about the Sustainable Development Goals that were passed at the UN last fall, and we are really organizing a lot of activity on education, helping to mobilize 300 universities across the world to have input in how to implement and succeed in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals in education and early child development. So all our work is with these kinds of partners. We have two main just two examples. We're doing a lot of work on education and emergencies, and a project called Education Emergencies Evidence for Action. Half the kids who are out of school in the world live in conflict-affected countries. We can improve their access and their ability to learn because of the resilience that they show and that we understand how to promote through research. There's lots of ways we generate actionable evidence. And you see, besides the International Rescue Committee and Global Ties, that our main partner in that initiative is our colleagues at Dubai Cares. And Dubai Cares has been very generous in recently awarding the IRC and the Global Ties a grant to work for the next several years in 3 emergency situations. In Sierra Leone, where the country's children were out of school for an entire year because of Ebola. In southern Niger, where Nigerian refugees have been driven across the border by Boko Haram, and in Lebanon, where Syrian refugee children are being served, but too many of them are still out of school. And we're doing a lot of different things that I won't spend time this morning talking about. The other is working on the Sustainable Development Goal 4, which is the education goal with the Sustainable Development Group, and I've already mentioned that. That's in collaboration with Pratham, which is one of India's largest and most effective education reform groups in India. So you get now a sense of how we work not just within this university, but a global network of research universities. And we're just at the very beginning processes of this, but it's a very exciting thing. We're going to have a conference on March 1st and 2nd on this conference on this campus, where we bring experts all over the world to talk about evidence for scaling. When you find something that works, how do you take it to systems? How do you take it to not just work in one little corner or one community or one set of villages, but for a nation? And that's what the goal of that conference is about, because we don't have really good research methods to understand how to effectively scale. So those are the kinds of things we're doing. Finally, what kind of impact do we want to have? We want to build a next generation of young scholars and implementers. We want to help donor and policy communities change life conditions for kids. And we want to supercharge 21st century universities who have the interest in being engaged in this way, bringing their scholarship, their science to bear, but need to do it in a different way if they're going to be effective. It won't surprise you then that this center and this university is so thrilled to have Maysa Jalbout speak with us this evening. Maysa currently serves as the Chief Executive Officer of the Abdulla Al Ghurair Foundation for Education, which is headquartered in Dubai, and it's all of a couple months old, and it hasn't even had its public launch yet. So you will hear a lot from Maysa over the next number of years in this new position. She's really had a very intense and interesting history of involvement in activities before she got to this position. She began her professional career in Canada, where she had leadership roles in social policy and education for the Canadian International Development Agency. So she worked on the government side of being a donor. She then moved to Jordan, where she first was the Director of Research and Strategy for Her Majesty Queen Rania Al Abdullah, and then became the CEO of the Queen Rania Foundation. So she began as a policy strategy person for the Queen and moved on to be the CEO of that organization. She then went to one of the most important and high-quality think tanks in the world, the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. in the United States. And at Brookings, she was a non-resident fellow, which means they liked her so much that they didn't make her live in Washington, for a center called the Center for Universal Education. And that center was one of the leaders in providing the evidence it took to really think about how we could achieve the Millennium Development Goal of getting all children in the world in primary school, of which there's still too many who are out there. So please join me in welcoming Maysa, and I think that's your first slide. Is that right, Maysa? Maysa Jalbout.
Thank you, Larry, for that kind introduction and for the invitation. I'm very honored to be here tonight. Let me also congratulate you, Larry, on establishing Global Ties. With your vision and the talented team you've assembled, the center is bound to make an important contribution to both the policy and programming fields impacting children and youth in this region and well beyond.
Fingers crossed.
Honorable guests, faculty, students, ladies and gentlemen, 84 million people across this region are trapped in raging conflict. Thousands of lives have been lost or torn apart every week. Thousands more suffering from injury, hunger, and trauma. Thousands of refugees risking their lives to reach Europe by boat and on foot. These are but a few of the daunting statistics, grim prospects, and haunting images of refugees in the Middle East. For most of us, what they have endured is not only unconscionable, it is unimaginable. Over the past 3 years, I've heard hundreds of stories of Syrian, Iraqi, and Palestinian refugee families suffering. It's hard to comfort a mother whose heart has been broken over the loss of her children, a father who's unable to protect his daughters, a child who bears the burden of feeding his family, or a teenager who lost her family at sea. During these encounters, I expected to hear these drained, discouraged, and even defeated voices, but I did not expect to hear so many remarkable stories of courage, resilience, and aspiration, especially among young people. Meet Ammar. Ammar is closest here to me. He's a 16-year-old Syrian refugee living in Za'atari camp in Jordan. I came to know Ammar in November of 2014. His film, We Walk Their Path, had just won one of UNICEF's top children's awards. In a 1-minute video, Ammar was able to portray so aptly the horrors children witness in war, the way media report events, and the tendency of children to copy what they see and learn from adults. Let's watch.
اشتباكات عنيفة بين الجيش الحر والجيش النظامي ولا تزال تدور حتى الآن.
Having watched this clip, you might feel disheartened. But if you leave here today demoralized, you will have missed the point Ammar makes. He told me, I'm very happy that people will see what's happening to children in Syria today, but I made this film because I want the world to help Syrian children go back to school instead of becoming fighters like my friends in Syria. Ammar's message was all the more poignant because he was not going to school at the time. Like so many boys affected by conflict across the region, he quit classes to help his father sustain their family of 8. Ammar had to give up his dream of one day becoming a doctor or an engineer to earn $7 a day by pushing a trolley to help people carry heavy bags around Za'atari camp. $7 per day is what keeps Ammar and many children like him from working towards their dreams. Some 2.7 million Syrian boys and girls don't go to school. Of those, 2 million are in Syria, and over 700,000 are in Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey. In addition, an estimated 1 in 10 school-age refugee children are currently working. Boys in particular are expected to contribute to their family's income by working on the street, in agriculture, or other harsh conditions. Syrian refugee girls are affected too, in different but equally terrible ways. They drop out of school to look after siblings so their parents can work. They get married before they're 18 years old, at alarmingly high numbers to lessen the burden on their families. According to the latest statistics from Lebanon, the rate of child marriage among refugee girls has doubled from 12 to 26%. Yet Ammar and other young people like him have found a way to turn their devastation into their new dreams. Thanks to the help of UNICEF and Save the Children, Ammar is back in school. He still pushes around the trolley to make money to support his family, but he is motivated to finish his school. I want to be a filmmaker now, he told me. I plan on making more videos with my camera. I hope to tell the stories of children from Syria and all over the Middle East. Meet Asma. Asma is a young Palestinian from Gaza. I met Asma in May 2015 at the World Economic Forum, where she was chosen to be one of 8 global shapers, a network of hubs led by young people who are exceptional and have the drive to make a contribution to their communities. Asma was recognized for her work on economic empowerment of youth and women in Gaza. At the time, she'd provided more than 1,000 training hours on entrepreneurship, marketing, and financing for small businesses. Asma told me she's compelled to help other young women and men and to show a different side of Gaza than the one that has become known to the world. A Gaza where young people defy the odds and turn the challenges of living under occupation, political and economic exclusion into hope and opportunity. You see, young Gazans like Asma do not know a time when life was normal. Over 70% of Gaza's population is made of refugees, and around 50% of the total population are under the age of 18. In their young lives, they have lived through 3 military sieges and an 8-year blockade that have restricted their daily lives and limited their futures. A survey of primary and secondary school teachers in Gaza showed that over 76% of students were performing at a lower than the level before any siege. Gazan youth also suffer from the highest youth unemployment rate in the world of almost 70%. This, combined with the difficulty they face in pursuing higher education outside of Gaza due to the blockade, contribute to the state of hopelessness among this young generation. It is therefore not surprising that over 70% of university students say that they're not at all hopeful about their future. But Asma is setting a different path for herself and young people like her. After earning a full scholarship to complete her master's at the London School of Economics in Management and Human Resources, she's serving as a fellow at Internet 2 in Washington, D.C., with President Obama's Emerging Global Leaders Initiative. Finally, meet Shada. Shada al-Khalil is a Syrian in her 20s who was fortunate enough to have left Syria 6 years ago, just before the war, to study in Germany. I spoke to Shada over the phone just a few months ago when I came across her Facebook page as part of my research on the potential of using technology to help refugee youth pursue higher education. In response to the pleas of her friends and strangers to share information with them about potential scholarships like the one she benefited from, Shada began posting a few links to her Facebook page. Very quickly, Shada realized that she was filling a real need that very few other organizations have tackled. Before the Syrian conflict, Syrian youth were among the most educated in the Middle East. With free access to schooling, secondary completion rates were at 74%. Today, Syrian youth in Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey have little to no access to secondary and post-secondary schooling, dropping their education and employment prospects to among the lowest in the region and beyond. In less than a year, Shada's self-funded workshops and social media outreach have become an important source of information. She tries her best to answer an average of 80 questions per day about the requirements for studying abroad, like the English language examinations of TOEFL and IELTS, how to prepare one's CV, and more. Her Facebook page now has over 32,000 followers. Shada is just about to complete her doctorate in electrical engineering and is committing to continuing to offer as much support to her fellow Syrians looking for similar opportunities in the years to come. Ammar, Asma, and Shada, and the millions of refugee youth across the region are leading the way in the fight against youth disenfranchisement, despair, and hopelessness. They have dedicated their young lives to give what they know every young refugee wants to have more than anything else: education. I'm hopeful that their powerful message has begun to resonate with the international community. Just last week, the UN Global Envoy for Education, former UK Prime Minister Gordon Brown, announced that $250 million have been raised by the EU and regional donors towards a plan to put 1 million children back in school by the end of 2016. Yet funding from traditional sources alone will not be enough. First, the past 5 years have made it abundantly clear that the refugee crisis is not only a humanitarian crisis. It is a long-term development challenge. The average refugee does not return home for 17 years. And in the Middle East, that's much longer, with the first generation of Palestinian refugees continuing to reside in refugee camps inside the Palestinian territories in Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon for over 70 years. Therefore, we cannot be looking for short-term education solutions. Second, we cannot expect host communities to carry all of the burden themselves. Lebanon alone is host to 1.1 million Syrian refugees, of whom over 400,000 are school-aged children. In many schools, refugees outnumber Lebanese children. Jordan, Lebanon, and Iraq, in particular, cannot withstand the pressure of schooling refugee children without straining their already fragile public education systems. Therefore, financial aid must also build the resilience of local education systems by improving the quality of teaching and lifting the learning outcomes for all children. Third, addressing access to education cannot be viewed in isolation. Children and youth's ability to enroll and stay in school is directly impacted by their parents' access to work and by their future prospects beyond education, especially employment and travel abroad. Therefore, education must be part of a holistic solution that considers their social and economic needs. The 3 points I just shared with you illustrate why financial resources alone are not enough. They show that there is room for the international community to improve the ways in which it has been supporting refugee education. I would also like to share with you 3 opportunities that deserve greater attention. The first opportunity is to include all children. To reach more Syrian and other refugees, we must also reach all marginalized children in the host countries. This is why I'm particularly optimistic about an initiative called RACE, Reaching All Children with Education, that started in Lebanon and is making its way to other parts of the region. So far, this initiative has succeeded in extending education to over 200,000 refugee children through a double shift system in 200 schools across the country, with a further plan to enroll the remaining 200,000 in the coming year. A big part of this initiative's success is that it has provided resources to the Lebanese government and its partners to increase access among Lebanese children from poor families, as well as other refugee school-age populations, including Iraqis and Palestinians. The second opportunity is to reach neglected refugee youth through technology. The drive to provide education for refugees in the Middle East has so far only focused on children. There have been little to no efforts to support the education of youth ages 15 to 24. This population is hard to reach, and traditional education approaches will not be sufficient. In a forthcoming report, we highlight the need for more flexible, affordable, and less resource-heavy models, such as blended learning, a combination of online and in-class courses. Although many education technology initiatives have begun to emerge, few are beyond the pilot stage. Much greater investment is required to fully explore the potential of technology. Promising initiatives, however, do exist. For example, a British council project known as LASER is set to offer language and academic skills through blended learning. It will bring together the expertise of Open University in the UK and the support of local partners to reach almost 3,000 Syrian refugees in Jordan and other countries. The third opportunity is to construct innovative financing models to secure more resources for refugee education. With competing humanitarian and development priorities, it's become clear that we need to be more innovative in generating new funds for aid to education. Mr. Brown and the Global Business Coalition for Education is trying to raise an additional $500 million in the next few weeks in time for the World Economic Forum in Davos and the Syrian Pledging Conference in the UK in early February. I'm particularly encouraged by philanthropists from the region stepping forward to shoulder the burden. Just months ago, the organization I work for, the Abdulla Ghurair Foundation for Education, became the single largest privately funded philanthropic entity focused solely on education in the Arab world. The foundation will support underserved Arab youth, first in the UAE and then in the region, in completing their higher education. However, we are just one organization, and despite the generous resources our founder has dedicated, we are limited in how many students we can support. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe inclusion, technology, and philanthropy will have a large role in shaping the future of education. We owe it to the examples of Ammar, Asma, and Shada to go beyond our comfort zones, to experiment, and to collaborate in the quest to educate all children and youth. Ammar, Asma, and Shada are part of a new generation of Arab youth who have found the strength, the courage, and the medium to narrate a better plot for refugee children and youth in the Middle East. If we listen carefully to the stories they are telling, we will hear the excited steps of a child heading to school for the first time, the potential of a young woman pitching her first business idea, and the steady march of young refugees towards hope for a better future. Thank you.
Maysa, thank you so much. It's my great pleasure now to introduce Tom Fletcher. Tom is a British diplomat by trade and craft. From 2011 to 2015, he served as the ambassador to Lebanon, and he was very involved in two of the initiatives that, and remains involved in two of the initiatives that Maysa described, RACE, Reaching All Children with Education, and the Global Business Coalition for Education. You may have a chance to tell us about some of that. Tom's diplomatic career sent him to Nairobi from 1998 to 2002, That tough hardship placed Paris from 2004 to 2007 and served as ambassador to Northern Ireland, advisor to Northern Ireland from 2007 to 2011. But he's made a big name for himself as a humorous diplomat by how he left the Lebanese post, from what I can tell, on the internet. And now he's organizing the global business community to help, solve some of the problems in education that Maysa laid out. He's here to give us another sense of both what he heard from Maysa and his own sense of the challenges in the region. So please welcome Tom Fletcher.
Well, thank you very much, Larry, and thank you, Maysa, for that superb overview of the challenges we face, but also the names behind the numbers: Amar, Asma, Shada, and so many others who many of us have the privilege to encounter through our work, and who inspire us really to continue this effort. So often, as Amar was saying to you, Maysa, so often it's very easy to get discouraged about Syria. And I worked for 4 years in Beirut. The embassy from Damascus was moved to our embassy in Beirut. Worked for 4 years on this crisis, day in, day out, on the politics of it. And it's a pretty grim crisis to be working on. Unrelenting, exhausting, and deeply depressing. And yet, we mustn't, as Amar says, we must not be discouraged. We mustn't give way to just assuming that this crisis has many more years to run, or that it is not possible for us to bring the diplomatic resources we have to bear on it. So I'm really encouraged by what you said, Maysa, and by not just the names you put to the numbers, but also the practical ideas that you have given us already and you continue to give us in this world as we try to meet these challenges. As Larry says, I'm a former ambassador, an ex-excellency, a recovering ambassador, and I'm recovering. Part of my recovery is here at New York University, and a number of these themes do actually come together at this university and in this room. Let me try to bring those together in response to Maysa. So, firstly, in diplomacy, you will hear a lot of platitudes. And one of the things that most irritated me about diplomacy was our ability to distill the most horrific human tragedy into insipid words. We would say, we are gravely concerned about the situation in Syria. It wasn't concern I felt for Syria, it was anger. I think we should continue to be enraged by what we're seeing in Syria. And that should drive us to work harder to deal with the unfinished business of this conflict, but also the unfinished business of getting kids into school. So please do not tolerate from government spokesmen, government officials, people like me who are recovering government officials, do not tolerate platitudes. You should be pushing us harder to help find the solutions to these problems that Maysa has identified. And one way we're trying to do that is through this program to get 1 million kids, Syrian kids, back into school. Primarily in Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey, where the burden of this crisis has fallen. If my country, the UK, had to accept a population influx of 1 in 3 people, governments would have fallen, societies would have changed, the politics would have been turned on its head. But this is what Lebanon, for example, has had to accept. The equivalent of every single Pole and Romanian moving to Britain, the equivalent of every single Mexican moving to America, the equivalent of every single American moving to China. These numbers are immense. So we're trying to get 1 million kids back into school. When we had set the target of 200,000 6 months ago, while I was still in Lebanon, a number of people described it as ridiculous and laughable and told us to be more realistic. We're on 220,000 already. And we will, through the ideas that actually Maysa and her team identified on double shift systems, we will go after that 1 million. And we will do that at Davos by trying to raise much greater private sector funding for this response. And we'll do that in London on the 4th of February by trying to raise much greater government resource for this response. It can be done, and we are certain that we will do it. We have a situation now where we are trying to prove that the pen is mightier than the sword. Simple as that. These kids are standing before us, and on the one hand, they are asking us to put pens in front of them, to put pens in their hand. And on the other, they're being offered the sword. And we are determined to get the pens into their hands for moral reasons, but also for wider reasons, because unless we manage to do that, we will find more kids strapping on inflatable life jackets and trying to sail across the Mediterranean in dinghies that don't have enough air for the journey. And we will find more kids strapping on suicide vests and marching into our metro stations. It's as simple as that. So we go to London aiming to get donor money to raise the figures that Maysa has described, but also to say to the private sector, we're not looking here just for your money. This isn't the old model of humanitarian support where we go to you and say, please be more responsible, business. Please donate to an NGO or to the UN and let us look after your money for you, because we know how to spend it. Because we don't. And we failed for many years to spend the money properly and effectively. So what we're doing in London is to say to the private sector, give us your ideas, your ingenuity, and your networks. So let me give you my quick fantasy moment in London. We are hoping that Queen Rania, the Lebanese Prime Minister, Turkish leadership will identify for us the 5 biggest obstacles they have to getting kids into school. So the first one is funding. We'll say, okay, the donor governments are here and they're going to fix that obstacle. Obstacle number 2, we don't have enough school buildings. We're hoping to look around the room and say, okay, who have we got here? IKEA. You know something about buildings. And get IKEA to put their hands up and say they'll help us build more schools and more school buildings in Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey. The next obstacle, we can't get the kids to school. There are too many kids for the school transport that we have. So we hope then to look around the room and say, okay, anyone here know anything about transport? And I'll look very hard at that point at Uber. And hopefully Uber will put their hand up and give us a solution on the transport. Next problem, the schools aren't connected. They don't have Wi-Fi. The kids can't get online. Okay, anyone here know anything about connectivity? Facebook. You know a thing or two about connectivity. Microsoft, Vodafone, these companies that have solutions to get Wi-Fi hotspots to the school. And then the final problem that they tell us they have is the quality of educational content and the devices to access it on. And at that point, we can look around, I hope, and look to the big education providers, Pearson, Microsoft, and so on, to give us that content and give us the devices to get education into the hands of those kids. When I was in government, we were always told, whatever you do, do not talk in the West about what we're doing and what we're trying to do on the ground in Syria, because you will only inflame the opposition. You will stir up those who would much rather we spent the money elsewhere. Those who think that basically foreigners are somehow different. Foreigners do not want the same things that we want. I was always told our societies have reached the limits of their compassion. Well, I think what we found over the summer, and particularly in response to those horrific photos of Aylan Kurdi washed up on the beach in Turkey, was actually our societies hadn't reached the limits of their compassion. And I find on this campaign that the more we raise these issues, the more support we get. I'll give you an example just from today. A teacher called me in the UK. He's just retired. He says, I've got loads of energy, loads of ideas left. I'm not ready to retire. How can I help on Syria? I went to my local charity and they said, just donate. We're going to work with tech companies on the 4th of February to link that teacher and many more like him to teachers in Syria who need help marking the homework, doing the lesson planning, mentoring the kids, and so on. There's a direct individual empowerment that can be part of this campaign. So I don't believe we've reached the limits of our compassion at all. I'll just conclude by saying, you mentioned the three cities I've spent most of my adult life in now, Nairobi, Paris, and Beirut. All of those cities hit by devastating acts of terrorism, ISIL, Daesh terrorism, in the last 2 years. And what's clear is that ISIL are trying to hit the grey areas. They're trying to hit the places where we coexist. They don't care who they hit in those areas, whether they're Christians or Muslims or whoever. They're hitting the areas where there is that coexistence. So we on the other side of the argument, and it is the key 21st century argument, are you for coexistence or not? On one side of the argument, you have ISIL, you have some of the US presidential candidates, and many others in our own societies who want to close swimming pools to immigrants, for example, in just the last 24 hours. Very, very loud voices on that side of the argument. On the other side of the argument, you have the rest of us, the coexisters. And we're going to have to shout much, much louder than those who no longer believe that we can live together. And that is where this room, of course, matters, because here, all of that comes together. This is one of those grey areas where you are promoting coexistence, where we are demonstrating a different model. It's also one of those areas, as we've heard from Larry, where you are leading new thinking on innovation in education and on global coexistence. So this battle in Syria is not just a battle for Syrians. It's not just a battle for education experts and education campaigners like us. This is your battle too. Thank you.
My name's Nadia. I'm originally from Chicago, but living in Abu Dhabi now. My question is, I know you're a new foundation, but how much involvement do you think the refugees themselves will have in the education process, considering how educated a lot of them probably are, and can probably be some of the resources for your schools?
Do you want to answer one by one or go around?
I was going to see how it went with one by one, and then if we start running out of time, I'll cluster them. But let's go one by one for now.
Sure. Well, so we're just starting off, and our focus is on higher education. So we're not necessarily going to be working in directly delivering education, but we will be working with organizations that will be supporting organizations that deliver education, and specifically higher education. Refugees are among underserved youth populations who obviously need support in education, so they will be one of the cohorts that we extend support to.
I'm Jane. I'm an education consultant based in Washington, D.C., where no one wants to live. What do you do? What about early childhood education? What are the prospects for that, for the refugees?
Well, so as I mentioned when I spoke, the focus has really been on primary education for refugees. But over the last year, in 2015, we spoke to many teachers and principals in Lebanon and in Jordan and in Turkey, and they were all very clear that early childhood education was critical to support, because many Syrian refugees and other refugees were arriving in school unprepared for the education process. But it is very challenging because many, those countries in particular, early childhood education is not necessarily available to local populations. So if the international community were to support refugees, they would also need to support local families in sending them to early childhood education. In general, ECD is still at a very low rate in the Arab world. So it is an uphill battle. It's understood among experts as critical, and parents do want to send their children. But it's one of those things where you have to prioritize resources, and it just hasn't gotten there yet.
We have a colleague here, Jana Fleming, from the Sheikh Salima Foundation, who's working on early childhood education here in the Emirates. And in March, there will be a major meeting. There's a number of the National Academies of Science around the world have created a forum called Investing in Young Children Globally. And you could Google Investing in Young Children Globally, and we're trying to provide a lot of evidence-based information to policymakers all over the world. In mid-March, there'll be a meeting in Amman on how to address early childhood issues in this extended crisis. So there's a lot going on. It'd be great to talk about that more later.
Hello, my name is Josephine Butler. I'm from Ireland, and I'm particularly interested in higher education and displaced academics from Syria. I see here there's a lot of international branch campuses in the United Arab Emirates. In fact, it has the highest concentration in the world. We don't know what these campuses are doing from the UAE. Tonight I've heard what the NYU are doing. What about the other campuses that are up in Dubai? It would be nice if there were a place on the UNHCR showing us, telling us what campuses from here are doing, and if there could be more of a united effort in reaching children and people in higher education in these refugee camps. I don't think we need to go as far as Britain. I think we have a large base of educators right here. We could have peripatetic professors going around. And my question is, could it be possible? Could it be possible to have a conference here, bringing together the international branch campuses, getting them to sit around tables to talk about what could be done? Could we get the UNHCR involved in hosting a place on their websites to tell people what exactly goes on here?
Great. Thank you for the question.
So again, much of the focus has really been on primary education. Even secondary education has not received much support. In fact, it's very critical that if we're going to sustain the gains we've made in primary education to provide secondary education to those 14 plus, we have seen very little progress in Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan in that area. But higher education is in high demand among Syrian refugees, and they're not necessarily looking just to the region. They're looking around the world. As I explained, that Ishada is providing information about scholarships available everywhere. And they are very, very eager to go wherever they will be accepted and where scholarships will be available. UNHCR is interested and has been looking at potentially identifying opportunities to connect higher education institutions in the region, building off of some of the efforts that Turkey has actually been doing, where they've offered up thousands of scholarships for any Syrian refugee that wants to enter university there. Of course, there's a big barrier, which is, Syrian refugees don't speak Turkish, so they have to spend and invest a lot of time in language training before they're able to enter. There are many challenges, and we probably don't have time to talk about it all today, but there's also the issue of language. Most Syrians were educated in Arabic, and therefore going to an international branch campus is actually very challenging for them. So they have to have someone help them invest time and the money to learn English for a good chunk of time before they're able to qualify to enter those universities. That's why the British Council initiative I highlighted is so important and extremely needed, and has a lot of young people applying to it. The idea that you could learn English wherever you are with the support of a local organization from a credible institution, and therefore that opens up the opportunity to you to pursue a higher education outside of the region, or even inside the region that is provided in English.
From the last two questions about early childhood and secondary education really suggest that we have a lot of work to do over the next 15 years as a global community around the Sustainable Development Goal 4 in education, because it means to guarantee a quality early childhood, primary, and secondary education to all children of the world. So there's been an expansion in the globe's commitment to expand to education since the Millennium Development Goals. And David Miliband, who is the president of the IRC, when he spoke at NYU New York last spring, challenged universities to find ways of becoming involved in this, using the great assets that universities have, the incredibly talented students and a research professoriate who wants to use good science and good scholarship to make a contribution. And Tom and I have been scheming a little bit at that February 4th meeting when he asked the question for who will raise their hand, how can we get universities involved in this too? So I think that's a very important thing.
Thank you. My name is Milad Sebali. I'm from Lebanon. I manage a company called Global Learning in Dubai, specialized in online learning for the past 15 years. One of the projects we established was the Syrian Virtual University back in 2002, which now has around 20,000 students studying online. I have two short questions, one on technology, one on finance, one for Maysa, one for Tom. The technology part, whenever we talk about technology, we're just scratching the surface. We're talking about either having content in Arabic or some kind of infrastructure or access. We need, in such cases with long-term crisis, an entire ecosystem, like an entire school model, which re-engineers the conventional way of schooling, which is costly and has a lot of restriction in terms of access. So, first question is there any, are there any initiatives that to build a virtual school or a blended learning school or a smart school on this side? The other point is that Tom, Maysa mentioned that there are 2 million students inside Syria. And the latest UNICEF reports mentioned, other than the Syrians, around 11 million out-of-school refugees in Iraq, Libya, Sudan, and Yemen. So if we are going through conventional fundraising with conventional education, which is high cost, I mean, now, thankfully, you're doing a great job raising the budget to $250 million to educate 1 million students in Lebanon in Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey for 1 year. But what next? I mean, if we don't innovate, if we don't use technology to re-engineer education, to build models that have large-scale, low-cost models.
That's great. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask them to wait their response until they get the other two questions. Madam, hold on for your microphone.
I want to first say thank you. And one of the things that you brought up was coexistence. That is hard to do, not impossible online, and addressing the trauma. So to be able to truly educate someone to be a global citizen in the 21st century, I do think we need technology, but I think we also need, I guess I wonder, how are you going to address the trauma, and how are you going to develop experiences that help young people become constructive members of society and coexist, understanding the true meaning behind it.
Thank you very much. The third question is over here.
My question is about the double shift system that you've been promoting in Lebanon, from what I understand. How would that work, let's say in Turkey, where there's a language barrier, and how many are you also training new teachers, or are these the same teachers working a double shift? And can the refugees also teach students if they have the qualifications? Thank you.
Great. So questions of breakout, innovation in technology and finance, coexistence online, how to address trauma, and double shift.
Very good. All probably require another hour to answer, but
And don't worry, we're not going to do that.
So on the issue of technology, I recognize completely that technology is a tool. It's not the answer in and of itself. But we are in a situation where traditional school models are not going to be able to reach all the children and youth that we need to reach. So it's not about putting the current curriculum online. It's about finding new ways of educating those populations. There is one virtual university that actually reached out to us. It's called the University of the People, which is out of the United States and is providing 2 undergraduate degrees, business and computer science, if I'm not mistaken. And they are very much interested in providing those degrees to Syrian refugees. The challenge is, as I mentioned earlier, that those degrees are in English. And they're very low cost, so you only have to pay for a course if you finish it and you take the exam, and it's about $500 a course, if I'm not mistaken. But it leads to an accredited degree, which we know, based on the research that we have done, is extremely important for Syrian refugees, because it's that accreditation that's going to help them, move on with their lives, to get a job, to perhaps immigrate to somewhere else. So it's very important. But the university, the University of the People, is looking for funding to turn their courses into Arabic, to Arabize them, not just translate them, but make them relevant, and to partner up with universities here in the region that will support their students in the process. So that's one example, and there are many others, but we have to be careful because quality is extremely important, and it's also important to look at accreditation in the region. Online education is largely not accepted in the Middle East, and for many, many Syrian refugees, leaving the region is not an option. Some do not want to, some cannot. So they will end up working here in the region, and they need accreditation locally. So it's not a magic solution. There's a lot to be done in order for all of this to come together, but we have to start, and soon.
Tom, any comments on innovation and finance?
You're exactly right, Ed. There's no... part of the reason why I've come out of government on this issue is because we've basically reached the limits to what we can do in the conventional ways. We're accepting that even if we raise large amounts of donor financing, and we plan to, for this February the 4th meeting, it will still only scrape the surface. It still won't fund the response to the plan that Maysa and others have worked up. So we have got to look in new areas. And it actually comes back to Jocelyn's question earlier on. So don't wait to be asked. Please don't expect UNHCR or the British government or the Syrian government or the Lebanese government to be on the phone to you saying, please help. Just get on with it and come up with your ideas. And do join, we'll talk afterwards, do join us at the Global Business Coalition, and we can link you up with other companies thinking in the same way. One of the things we try to do is to create those partnerships and then just stand back. Financing Commission is part of the response to this. Maysa mentioned it earlier. Gordon Brown, as UN envoy, is chairing a commission now with the great minds running from Larry Summers to Barroso to former President Kikwete to try and explore where you find the finance to get 59 million kids globally back into school. So that is meant to be coming up with the answers, drawing on expertise, and including from this room. One of the other areas we've been working on recently is trying to find the education Bill Gates. Bill Gates has made a huge difference on health through that kind of single-minded sense of purpose, but also through enormous resource. And so if anyone knows the education Bill Gates, we'd love to meet him or her. We need someone like that to come up and basically decide to change the world. Are we doing coexistence and so on now? Larry?
Pardon?
Are we doing coexistence as well now?
We're doing coexistence, and we're doing double shift. And we're doing it quick.
Okay, very quickly. Coexistence, we did pilot something in Beirut on coexistence in the curriculum with a fantastic NGO called Adyan. Come and find me afterwards, I'll get you more details, or look it up online. But it took us 2 years to get 16 different religious groups to agree a common curriculum about how they would teach each other's religion for the first time. And so we have a curriculum now, road-tested to destruction in Lebanon, and it's a pretty hard place to test a curriculum like that I think we could use as a model elsewhere.
Double shifts, Maysa?
So on double shifts, I believe your question was specifically on Turkey. Is that correct? Yeah. Correct.
So I was wondering, since there's such a large concentration.
Yes. So in Turkey, they've taken a slightly different approach than in Lebanon and Jordan. They have actually opened up schools for double shifts, but they're running the second shift in Arabic. And yes, Syrian refugee teachers in Turkey are allowed to teach, but it's not official in the sense that they're treated as volunteers and they're given a stipend. They're not part of the labor law. That's meant to change over time. The other thing is that Turkey's very conscientious of the fact that they have a very large Syrian refugee population, and they have the largest out-of-school population in Turkey. So they do not want to promote and support a parallel system to their formal education. Their approach is to try to integrate Syrian refugees from an early on age. So the younger you are, the harder they're trying to bring them into the Turkish language public education system. Obviously, this doesn't work if you're in high school, and the emphasis there is on more non-formal education. They've got a long, long way to go to implement the same double shift system as in Lebanon. They are lacking resources. Turkey has invested over $6 billion of their own resources in supporting Syrian refugees, in hosting them, and they've received almost no support for refugee education. So, you know, it's not as much progress as Lebanon.
Questions?
We missed trauma, sorry.
Trauma.
Trauma, yes. It's in the plan. Psychosocial support is part of the plan.
And we are actually doing a lot of work at NYU Abu Dhabi and NYU New York on the mental health and social emotional needs and how to meet them through the schooling experiences. That's some of the things we're going to be doing with support of Dubai Cares, actually, in work in Niger, Sierra Leone, and Lebanon.
I would just say, just on trauma, one of the things that I was really surprised about as I traveled across Lebanon, and how many teachers approached me to say that we need psychosocial counseling and support. So, you know, there isn't this sort of shying away from it or thinking that it's not important because resources need to go into other things. They see it as critical because they feel helpless in supporting the kids. So they want training and they want trainers on the ground.
And the broader vision of results that we want for education no longer is just literacy and numeracy. It's also social emotional development. It's one of the dimensions of the Learning Metrics Task Force, which the UN has embraced and which is increasingly guiding education vision.
All right. Hi, my name is Noor. Just want to ask about what happens after the education. How do we ensure that this education is beneficial?
That's a great question. You answered in one sentence, so now somebody else gets to ask a one-sentence question. Right here. And I apologize for the people who I'm not getting to, but there will be a reception just outside that follows, and you'll feel free to ask questions then.
Hi, my name is Debbie. I'm a principal here in Abu Dhabi. What about, you talked we're going to start in our backyard right here in Abu Dhabi or in the UAE. What about these lost children of laborers who can't afford to go to school? We've got children from the Philippines, Nepal, Sri Lanka. What about those children? Will they get access to an education?
Great question, and I cut you off so you could get it, because we have time for one more over here. The gentleman.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Amar Mawazini. I'm from Syria. Just a quick question on your initiatives. So you mentioned education. Would they involve vocational programs? Thank you.
So that's a great question. So what about after education? What about vocation programs? What about, pardon? Children here.
Right. I'm not sure that we have enough time for all of these, but I'll take a go at a couple.
Be less
of them.
careful in your answer.
Right, okay. So what happens after education? We're hoping that education is the key to having a future. This is what the refugees have been telling us for the last 5 years. Without education, there can be no hope, there can be no future for our children. I've had parents come up to me and saying, please, I will forego food for education. This is how important it is for refugees. What about children from other parts of the world who are living here? I mean, I have not worked in that space, and the foundation that I'm going to be working on is not going to be working on that space. We're focused strictly on Arabs. I think everyone has to pick a niche, has to pick a focus, but I do see the importance of that. As far as vocational education, this has not been a focus. Unfortunately, vocational education is quite weak in Lebanon and in Jordan, less so in Turkey. So in Turkey, there has been more movement there, and there's been more encouragement towards channeling Syrian refugee youth to that stream. But we're a very long way from seeing sort of donors invest heavily in that space because there aren't very many quality providers. But it could change. The Germans and others are very interested in vocational education, so we're hopeful that it will become a stream that is available. But with that, there has to be support for being able to work in the vocations that they might get accredited in. So it ties hand in hand. So I answered all.
Brilliant. You did all three. So I'll only add very briefly. Yeah, I mean, our wider initiative is all children in education. So that applies equally here. Our initial focus is the Syria campaign because that's somewhere we believe we can bring a lot of energy quickly and a lot of resource quickly, but that doesn't mean we're turning our back on everything else. Vocational, I think, to be honest, this depends completely on the private sector. And so bringing more and more business into this, towards this challenge is the way to do it. We've got one member in our group who is doing it purely because he says he wants to create more consumers and find more people to work for him. And that's fine. If he wants to get kids in school for that reason, that doesn't bother me at all. So bringing the private sector to that question, we have 2 or 3 foundations in particular who are rolling out announcements at Davos on specific vocational training projects for the region, because there's no point in educating people and then leaving them with no hope at the end of it. Yeah.
Please forgive me for being rude and pressing you for questions. Please forgive me if I didn't call on you. Please accept NYU Abu Dhabi Institute's gratitude for coming this evening. Join us for a reception outside the door afterwards, and we can continue conversation. But before we end, please join me in thanking Maysa and Tom for spirited discussion.